All right, welcome everyone. Today we're taking a deep dive into atomic habits. We'll be looking at James Clear's book and trying to really wrap our heads around how those little tiny changes can make such a big difference over time.
Yeah, it's all about understanding how that 1% can really add up, you know?
Exactly. It kind of flips the script on how we usually think about success, doesn't it?
Definitely, we tend to think about huge, sweeping changes, like those overnight transformations.
Yeah, the new year, new me kind of thing.
Totally. But really, when it comes down to it, it's the small things we do consistently that make the real difference.
That's a great point. Actually, Clear illustrates this perfectly with this great story about the British cycling team. So they weren't anything special before 2003, but then they hired this guy, Dave Brailsford, as their new performance director.
And he came in with this totally radical approach. He called it the aggregation of marginal gains philosophy.
So what, like making tiny changes everywhere?
Yeah, exactly. He was super meticulous about getting the best out of every little detail. He redesigned the bike seats so they were more comfortable.
Oh, okay. Trying to reduce fatigue, I guess.
Yeah. And get this, he even taught the riders the best hand washing techniques.
Really?
Yeah. All to prevent them from getting sick.
Wow, that's thinking about everything.
Right. And it doesn't stop there. They even painted the inside of the team truck white.
Seriously? Why?
So they could spot any dust more easily.
Dust. That's wild. But I guess it makes sense, right? You're trying to get every tiny edge you can.
Precisely.
All those little things, they could add up to, I don't know, maybe like a slight improvement overall.
Well, their results were anything but slight.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, within 5 years, they were absolutely crushing it at the Olympics and racking up Tour de France wins left and right. It's crazy to think that all those insignificant little tweaks led to such a massive shift.
That's incredible. It's a great example of how consistency really is key.
It really is. It all comes down to the power of compounding those small improvements,
Yeah.
Think about it this way. If you could get just 1% better each day at something for a year.
Okay, 1%, that doesn't sound like much.
Right, exactly. But by the end of the year, you'd be 37 times better than when you started.
Wow. Okay, that puts it into perspective. But I think a lot of us struggle with this, right? Because you're putting in the effort, making those small changes, but you're not always seeing those results right away.
Yeah, you can get discouraged pretty easily. You start thinking, are these small changes even making a difference?
Right, exactly.
Clear talks about this too. He uses the concepts of the valley of disappointment and the plateau of latent potential. It's like when you're melting an ice cube. You keep increasing the temperature.
But nothing's really happening for a while.
Yeah, at first. But the whole time you're building up to that point where the ice starts to melt like crazy. That's that plateau of latent potential.
So even though we can't always see it, those consistent efforts are accumulating under the surface, working their magic.
Exactly. And this is where the idea of focusing on systems instead of goals comes into play.
Oh, I've heard about this. I've always struggled with that feeling of, okay, now what? After I reach a goal. It seems like focusing on systems would be a lot more effective in the long run.
It really is. Clear actually draws on some work by Scott Adams that really highlights the difference between systems and goals. He argues that if you really want to make lasting change, you have to focus on building the right systems.
Okay, so what do we mean when we talk about systems? Can you break that down for us a little?
Sure. It's basically about shifting your focus from the outcome you want to achieve to the process of getting there.
Okay, I think I'm following.
Let me give you an example. Say you're a musician. Your goal might be to give an amazing performance, right?
Right.
But your system is all the stuff you do to get there, like how you practice, how you rehearse, how you keep refining your skills. It's about those daily actions, those habits.
Ah, so it's not just about the end goal. It's about all the little steps along the way.
Exactly. And Clear points out a few problems with this goal-first mentality. Winners and losers, they often have the same goals.
Huh, that's interesting.
What sets them apart is their systems.
So it's not just about wanting to win, it's about putting in the work day after day.
Exactly. It's about dedication to the process.
I see. I've totally fallen into that trap, though, of thinking, once I reach this goal, then I'll be happy. But that kind of thinking, it just makes happiness conditional.
Right, and it sets you up for disappointment if you don't reach the goal.
Totally.
Plus, goals can actually work against long-term progress, A goal is like a finish line.
Okay, but systems are more about
Continuous improvement,
Right.
no matter what goals you're working towards.
So how does all of this tie back to atomic habits?
Well, think of atomic habits as the building blocks of your systems.
Hmm.
It's not about making random improvements here and there. It's about consciously designing those tiny habits that, when combined, create a framework for constant growth and progress towards, well, anything you want to achieve.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the importance of systems and how those consistent small actions really add up over time. Now let's talk about how we actually build those atomic habits in a practical way.
Well, Clear actually gives us a really great framework for that. He calls them the 4 laws of behavior change.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What are they?
Make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying.
All right, I like it. Super clear and straightforward.
Yeah.
Let's break them down one by one, starting with make it obvious. What does that actually look like in real life?
So it's basically about creating really clear cues for the habit you want to build. Instead of just saying, I'll exercise more, you make a specific plan.
Okay, so like, I'll go for a 20-minute walk every morning at 7 a.m. in the park.
Exactly. You're removing any ambiguity, making the action as clear and specific as possible.
That makes sense. It reminds me of the idea of habit stacking,
Oh, yeah, that's a great example.
like using an existing habit as a cue for a new one. Like saying, after I pour my morning coffee, I'll meditate for 5 minutes.
Exactly. You're using your existing routine to trigger the new habit. And that actually leads us perfectly into the second law, make it attractive.
Right, I was just going to say, so how do we make those healthy habits more appealing so we actually want to do them?
Well, one way is through what Clear calls temptation bundling.
Oh, I like that. What is it?
It's basically pairing something you want to do with something you need to do.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it.
Like only letting yourself watch your favorite TV show while you're on the treadmill.
Ooh, that's a good one. I might actually try that.
It's all about finding creative ways to make those healthy habits more enticing. And then we come to the third law, make it easy.
Which is all about reducing friction, right?
Right. Removing any obstacles that might get in the way of your habit.
So what are some examples of that?
It could be anything from prepping your workout clothes the night before, to keeping healthy snacks handy so you're not tempted by junk food, to setting up your coffee maker the night before so it's ready to go in the morning. It's all about making those good choices the easy choices.
Yeah, if I have to go out of my way to do something healthy, I'm way less likely to actually do it.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy. What's the last one?
Make it satisfying. This one's all about making sure the habit itself is rewarding in some way.
So it's not just about the end goal, it's about making the process itself enjoyable.
Exactly. One great way to do this is by tracking your progress. Seeing those small wins along the way can be really motivating. Whether you're marking off days on a calendar, using a habit tracking app, or just keeping a journal, find what works for you and stick with it.
It's about celebrating those small victories, right? No matter how tiny they seem.
Absolutely. Those little wins add up.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, the power of those tiny changes, the importance of systems over goals, and now these 4 laws of behavior change. Anything else we should touch on before we wrap up this part of our deep dive?
Oh, there's one more thing. Clear also talks about the importance of an identity-based approach to habit change.
Identity-based. I don't think I've heard of that. What does that mean?
Well, it's the idea that our habits are often a reflection of our underlying beliefs about ourselves. Instead of just trying to change our behaviors, we need to actually shift the story we tell ourselves about who we are.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see where you're going with this. So, like, instead of saying, I'm trying to eat healthier, you'd say,
I'm a healthy eater.
I'm a healthy eater. I like that. It's subtle, but it feels powerful.
Right. It's about aligning your actions with your identity, creating a self-image that supports the habits you want to build.
Yeah, because if you see yourself as a healthy person, then eating healthy just naturally follows. It's way more empowering than just trying to force yourself to do something you don't believe you can actually do.
Exactly. It's not about imposing habits on a resistant self. It's about becoming the type of person who naturally embodies those habits.
And that ties back to what we were talking about before, right? Lasting change doesn't come from some big overnight transformation. It comes from those small, consistent actions, those atomic habits that unity over time.
Exactly. It's all about those tiny 1% improvements compounded day after day, week after week, month after month. Those small actions can eventually lead to a total transformation, not just in our behaviors, but in our whole sense of self.
That's a pretty amazing thought. So how can our listeners start applying this identity-based approach in their own life? How do we actually shape our identity to support the habits we want to cultivate?
Well, Clear suggests this really simple but powerful exercise. Ask yourself, who is the type of person who could achieve the things I want to achieve? So, for example, if you want to run a marathon, you might ask yourself, what kind of person is capable of running a marathon?
And then you start to pinpoint the qualities and habits that align with that identity. A marathon runner is disciplined, consistent, they're resilient, they prioritize their training, they listen to their body, they feel themselves properly.
Exactly. And then it's about starting to embody those qualities in your own life, even in small ways. Maybe you start by carving out time for a short run each day, even if it's just 15 minutes. Or you start being more mindful of your nutrition, making small, healthy choices throughout the day.
It's about taking those baby steps, those atomic habits, to build the foundation for that new identity.
Right. And as you start to see yourself actually taking action, embodying those qualities, your belief in yourself grows. You start to see yourself as the kind of person who can achieve those things.
It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
The more you act in alignment with your desired identity, the more you believe in your ability to become that person. And that belief fuels your motivation to keep going.
Exactly. And that's how we create lasting change. It's not about forcing yourself to do things you don't believe you can do. It's about gradually shifting your identity, your beliefs about yourself.
Shifting those beliefs to support your desired habits.
Right, which ultimately leads to those amazing results you're looking for.
This has been really insightful. I think we've covered a lot of great ground here. We'll be back after a short break to wrap up this deep dive and leave our listeners with some thought-provoking questions.
Sounds good.
And we're back. I'm still thinking about all this stuff about the 4 laws of behavior change. Such a cool framework for understanding how habits really work.
It is, and I think what really fascinates me is that it's not all about willpower or motivation, It's about getting how our brains work with habits and then using that to our advantage.
Working with our brains, not against them.
Love it.
You mentioned earlier that Clear emphasizes an identity-based approach to habit change. Can you unpack that a bit more?
Sure thing. It's this idea that our habits often come from what we believe about ourselves deep down. So instead of just trying to change what we do, we change the story we tell ourselves about who we are.
So it's like saying, I'm a healthy eater, instead of I'm trying to eat healthier.
Exactly. That little change in how we talk can actually have a huge impact on what we do. It's about getting our actions and our identity to match up, creating a self-image that makes those good habits easier.
I can see that. It's like it creates this internal consistency. If I see myself as a healthy person, then eating healthy just kind of comes naturally.
Yeah.
It's way more powerful than forcing myself to do something I don't even believe I can do.
Right. It's not about forcing those habits on yourself when you're not ready. It's about becoming the kind of person who just does those things naturally.
And that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, doesn't it? Real change doesn't happen overnight. It comes from those small, consistent actions, those atomic habits. And over time, they change who we are at our core.
Exactly. It's those tiny 1% improvements every day, week after week, month after month. Those little things end up making a huge difference. They change our behavior, but they also change how we see ourselves.
So how can our listeners actually start using this identity-based approach in their lives? How do we actually shape our identity to make it easier to build those habits we want?
Clear suggests a really simple exercise, but it's super powerful. Ask yourself, who's the kind of person who could achieve the things I want? Like, let's say you want to run a marathon. You might ask, what kind of person can actually run a marathon?
Okay, and then you'd start to figure out what qualities and habits that person has. A marathon runner is disciplined, consistent, tough. They make their training a priority, they listen to their body, and they eat right.
Exactly. And then it's about starting to live those qualities out in your own life, even in little ways. You could start by making time for a short run each day, even just 15 minutes. Or maybe you become more aware of what you eat, making healthier choices here and there throughout the day.
Taking those small steps, those atomic habits, it's like laying the foundation for that new identity.
Exactly. And as you start doing things, living out those qualities, your belief in yourself will grow. You'll start to see yourself as someone who can actually achieve those things.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
Yeah.
The more you act like the person you want to be, the more you believe you can become that person.
Yeah.
And that belief drives you to keep going.
That's it. And that's how we make real, lasting changes. It's not about pushing ourselves to do stuff we don't think we can do. It's about changing our identity, our beliefs about ourselves a little bit at a time.
Changing those beliefs so they match up with the habits we want.
Right. And then those awesome results you're looking for, they just naturally follow.
This is all so insightful.
Mhm.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into atomic habits, what's the one big thing you hope our listeners will take away from all of this?
I think the most important thing to remember is that small changes, when you do them consistently, can lead to amazing results. Don't underestimate how powerful those little 1% improvements can be. Focus on building those systems, not just chasing goals. And remember that real change comes from shaping who you are, not just what you do.
It's about those small atomic habits, day after day. They're what make us the people we want to be and help us build the life we want to live.
Absolutely. It's a journey, not a race to the finish line. Enjoy the ride, celebrate those little victories along the way, and trust that those consistent efforts will get you to where you want to go.
Love that. That's such a great way to put it. Now, before we wrap things up completely, James Clear asks a really thought-provoking question in his book, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it. He asks, if you could get 1% better each day at one specific area of your life, what would it be?
That's a fantastic question because it really makes you think about where you want to grow and then imagine those small, practical steps that can get you there.
And it doesn't have to be some big, ambitious thing. It could be something simple, like being more patient with your kids, learning to really listen when people talk to you, or even getting better at cooking.
Totally. The key is to pick something that really matters to you, something that lines up with what you value and want in life. And then it's about finding those little habits, those 1% improvements that you can start doing today to make that vision a reality.
So to all of you listening, take a minute to think about that question. What's one area in your life where you want to see that 1% improvement every day? What little habits can you start adding to your routine to make that happen? Remember, even the tiniest actions can make a huge difference when you do them consistently.
And don't forget, it's not about being perfect, it's about making progress. There will be days when you slip up, when those old habits try to sneak back in, but don't beat yourself up about it. Just recognize it, learn from it, and get back on track. It's that consistency over time that really matters.
This deep dive into atomic habits has been so insightful. I hope you found it helpful and inspiring too. Keep these ideas in mind, embrace those small steps, and keep working to be the best version of yourself, one atomic habit at a time. Okay, we're back. Wow, all this talk about atomic habits has me feeling really inspired. It's amazing how such small changes can make such a big impact over time.
Yeah, I totally agree. It really changes the way we think about making a difference in our lives, doesn't it? You don't need some massive overnight change.
Exactly. It's about those little things, those 1% improvements that we do day after day. They're what really move us toward who we want to be.
And one of the most empowering things about Claire's book, I think, is that it shows us we're not stuck with the habits we have. We can actually change them, shape them, and use them to create the life we want.
It's about taking control, isn't it? Choosing those actions that help us become the person we want to be.
Absolutely, and remembering that it's a journey, not a sprint. Enjoy the process, celebrate the little wins along the way, and have faith that those consistent efforts are what will really pay off in the end.
So true. Now, before we wrap up, there's a really interesting question that Claire asks in his book. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. He says, if you could get 1% better each day at one specific area of your life, what would it be?
That is a great question. It forces you to think about where you want to improve and what concrete steps you can take to get there.
It doesn't have to be anything huge or complicated either. It could be as simple as being more patient with your kids, or being a better listener, or even just getting better at cooking.
Exactly. The important thing is that it's something that's meaningful to you, something that lines up with your values. And then it's all about finding those little habits, those 1% improvements that you can start incorporating today to make that a reality.
So for everyone listening, take a moment to consider that question. What's one area in your life where you'd like to see that 1% daily improvement? What small habits can you start putting into practice to get there? Even those tiny actions, when you do them consistently, can have a big impact.
And remember, it's not about being perfect, it's about making progress. Some days you might slip up, those old habits might try to sneak back in, but that's okay. Just recognize it, learn from it, and get back on track. It's that consistency over time that really counts.
This deep dive into atomic habits has been so eye-opening. I hope you found it valuable and inspiring. Remember these ideas, embrace the power of those small steps, and keep working to become the best version of yourself, one atomic habit at a time. Thanks for joining us.